So, good afternoon, everyone. Hello, I am Rachel Dillon, EVP of Sales and Marketing here at Strategus. Thanks for joining us on this discussion around programmatic audio. And for many of you who are joining across streaming, music, digital radio, and podcasts, and how it can work alongside channels that you might already be investing in, such as CTV, online video, and display. Our goal today is really, really simple. We're going to talk about how programmatic audio is growing and make it easier to understand how to use it. Digital audio is on track to reach the mid-teens in billions of ad spend over the next few years. So this is definitely a growing and expanding area. Yet audio today still gets, kind of smaller share of budgets as advertisers get more familiar with the medium, and which means there's a lot of upside on the table. I'm incredibly excited today to be joined by Ari Stein. Ari is the Senior Director of Programmatic Ad Sales at SiriusXM Media, which includes household names such as SiriusXM, Pandora, as well as podcast publishers such as the Unwell Network. Ari and his team work with agencies and brands every day to grow and measure programmatic audio, and I'm thrilled to have you today. Thanks so much for being here, Ari.
Thank you for having me, Rachel. It's great to talk to y'all.
So let's just start with the basics around programmatic audio. When you say programmatic audio, what channels are you really talking about? Streaming music, digital radio, podcasts, smart speakers? Give our listeners just a little bit of a glimpse into what that means for you.
Yeah, one of the things we've been very excited about at SiriusXM Media and formerly Pandora when we initially started our programmatic journey is that we've really enabled any rotational media that's available through programmatic pipes. So we wanted that to be a buying tactic that was available to anyone who was interested in purchasing, whether it was RTB or programmatic guaranteed. And anything that we offer now outside of sponsorships, it can be accessed via DSP. So think streaming audio, or stream music specifically, such as Pandora, or streaming audio that includes talk radio and live sports, as well as the podcasting channel, which is now amazingly close to 5 years old in terms of its programmatic availability, but it's still very much in a growth phase. And more listeners, more consumers are getting into it, which is offering us more scale to offer our partners, which is in a programmatic space, is incredibly important. Scale is what helps them deliver both against campaigns and KPIs.
You mentioned podcasts, Ari, and that's an area at Strategist that has become incredibly more of an area of interest for advertisers. So most people think about podcast advertising as host reads. Can you give
Mhm.
us a little bit of a glimpse into how do you explain programmatic podcast advertising and what's available today?
Absolutely. Host reads are incredible. It's where the industry started. It's how it grew up. It's what frankly funded the boom in podcasts for years that allowed us to get to the point where we have so much amazing content, so many amazing hosts to interact with today. But think of a podcast host read as really a sponsorship opportunity. It's an influencer play. It has its place. It's absolutely something that brands should explore and lean into, but it's also incredibly limited in terms of its reach. You're only speaking to that podcaster's audience, to that host's audience. Whereas now, when you have just within our own network, 70 million monthly uniques in the US, you have thousands of podcasts, which you and I may have heard of Conan O'Brien, and he's great and he's got millions of listeners. But at the end of the day, if you're listening to some random podcast that is of high interest to you, that most people have never heard of the host, you're still leaned in. You're still an active consumer. You're still someone who a brand may want to speak to. So in addition to host reads, we've really grown the opportunity to just serve rotational audio creative, to serve it, in an appropriate manner that fits the podcast channel, but that still can speak to millions upon millions of consumers at once. And that's, again, it's not an or to a host read. It's very much an and. It's that I'm going to take my sponsorship, my influencer play, I'm going to add mass reach to that to really achieve my goals.
So we've seen a lot similarly to the CTV realm where consumer, consumption, listening of streaming audio has increased dramatically over the last number of years, but ad budgets are still, to those numbers. What would you say is maybe the biggest misconception today that you hear from advertisers around, just audio advertising and what they might be able to leverage with it?
I think there's two big ones that really can impact the way somebody's thinking about a media plan. The first one is that audio is not as powerful as sight, sound, and motion. That notion of only having sound as part of the ad creative limits your ability to deliver a powerful message to consumers. And that's just simply not true. We know that based on advertiser and consumer surveys and research. We know that based on neurological studies that have been run over the years. The opportunity to serve an audio creative to a user when they're leaned in, when they're paying attention, and letting the imagination fill in the rest really leaves you with an opportunity to, no pun intended, leave an impression on a potential consumer. So I think that's the first one. And anyone who's done significant amounts of testing with audio or significant amounts of testing audio plus their other channels, they're aware of this. They understand that audio is that much more powerful, or at least as powerful as some of their visual media. The other major misconception is that audio creative is hard to come by. That they don't necessarily have their creative or planning teams working on it, and that's so incredibly untrue. We have a powerful in-house audio creative practice. We've been offering audio creative production as a value add for 15 years to anyone who's spending within our platform. We never want it to be the reason why somebody doesn't run a campaign. And we can turn something around as quickly as 48 hours. So it's not a massive production, but it's still a powerful and strong creative for clients to use. I'm going to add a third, actually, measurements. Everyone assumes audio is not measurable, especially in the podcast space. And the reality is that we've built a pretty powerful measurement engine from the top of the funnel to the bottom of the funnel that's available. It's not new. It's not in beta. It's a very well-worn path that many of our clients use to prove out the efficacy of their audio buys and their podcast buys. And not to knock our CTV partners, because we know they're doing great work, but it's actually more measurable than CTV right now. So there's really an opportunity to understand where your audio is at that I think most folks just haven't necessarily had the education on or had the time to invest in understanding what can be measured in the audio space.
It's very interesting. I want to click into one area of what you just mentioned, because I read a stat recently that said that 79% of audio consumption actually happens when you're not, in front of a screen. So these are individuals who are in their cars or, on a walk or on a run, other areas, and a great opportunity to engage, with our consumers. How does that, screenless interaction, should that kind of change maybe the advertising strategy or the media planning as well, for our listeners?
I think it's a great way to think about filling in the gaps in terms of how you can message and when and where you can message to clients. If you're thinking about CTV or linear television or even display ads, right? Somebody has to be looking at a screen to really absorb any of those types of ad formats. And while many of us spend a few hours a day at this point, whether it's on our computers or it's in front of our television at night when we're trying to unwind, we spend a lot of time with those screens. We're still spending more time with audio. Over 5 hours a day is spent with audio, to your point, whether commuting or exercising, or for me, it's cooking, cleaning, and everything else in the kitchen as when my kids come home from school. But that audio is there and it's present with me. And it's what I'm paying attention to, as you can probably tell by the number of dishes I break when I'm doing dishes. But the audio is what I'm focused on, because that's the content I've opted into while I'm going through the rest of my day. That, again, it's just not the same as the couple of hours a night I might be watching TV.
I want to switch into a conversation around one of my favorite topics, around targeting. I know when we first started running programmatic audio here at Strategist, the targeting was a little limited. That's changed quite a bit over the last couple of years. So talk to us a little bit about what's available today as it relates to data and targeting related to audio.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I'm very proud of here at Pandora/SiriusXM is that we've spent years honing our proprietary audience targeting opportunities. You'd be amazed what you can know just from how users are using our app, what they're listening to, when they're listening to it, everything from lifestyle to life stage to political leanings. And these are all verified audiences that we've built over the years that we're able to offer consumers on a direct IO or programmatic basis, which is the other thing that we've worked really hard on over the last several years, is ensuring that there's parity when it comes to not just audience targeting, but really anything you can do on a direct IO versus a programmatic media plan. A lot of the reasons that marketers are getting into programmatic is to be able to bring their own audience data. And this started for us on the streaming music side, where we were very early on working to ensure that all the right signals were getting passed, whether it's made when users opted in to passing that type of information, or IP address, or really any other available signal that a DSP can match onto, find that user within their broader device graph, and apply the audience targeting that the clients opted into and upload it into the DSP. So the opportunities are really limitless. Podcasts, a little bit of a different beast, just in terms of how it's set up and what types of data are passed through. But again, we've worked very hard to ensure that as much signal as can be passed is in that bid stream, which allows DSPs to catch into it and really drive scale against audiences that clients want to use. Best example, Trade Desk's household graph over the years has been one of the most scalable options to apply to a podcast campaign and really be able to find scale against client audiences when the current perception in the market is that it's not an addressable medium, which just isn't true.
And you touched on something that we're really passionate about at Strategist is around looking at it from a holistic perspective, from an omni-channel perspective. Oftentimes audio is not running in a silo. We have other tactics such as connected television, on the video display. So talk to us a little bit about what's working best from a retargeting as well as maybe a sequential messaging when you kind of look at all those tactics working together.
Yeah, I'm 6'5", so I'm a little tall to get on a soapbox. But if you've heard me talk anywhere in the market, you've heard me talk about CTV plus audio, right? We're not competing with CTV. We're not looking to displace CTV. CTV is an incredibly important piece of what buyers will include in their media plans in order to get their message across to consumers. Audio is right there with CTV. If it's the next thing on your agenda, if it's the thing that you're considering both measuring and running, alongside your audio buys, then you're really going to be able to find a ton of scale and a ton of opportunity to hit a message home. We have case studies that we've run, surveys that we've run that really dig into what happens when you're combining these channels. So first and foremost, you're getting incremental reach. We average anywhere from 14 to 50% incremental reach to CTV buys, depending on which provider you're talking about when adding our audio to one of those campaigns. But you're also getting results. We've seen anywhere on a particular CPG campaign that we ran, we saw 14% increased brand lift in terms of awareness and affinity when adding podcasts and streaming audio to a CTV campaign. For lower funnel campaigns, one of my favorite examples, we work with an aggregator of tier 3 auto dealerships. When they added digital audio to their CTV campaigns, the average dealer saw an increase of 5% market share in their market for car sales and engagement. And that kind of number is huge to an auto dealer. So really any part of the funnel can be enhanced when you're combining these things. And when you're thinking about an omni-channel plan and really strategizing how that audio fits in, not just having audio as an add-on at the end of the plan, then you really see the 1 + 1 = 3 results that come from it.
We could all probably argue that the word of 2026 is outcomes or measurability. You can pick which one you think is the top. You mentioned audio and attribution and just being very measurable. So would love to hear about, kind of how that's expanded or where you're seeing the biggest impacts from a measurement perspective.
So I think one of the great things that's evolved over the last 5 or 6 years is MTA. And really understanding what every channel within your media mix is contributing to that bottom line. I started in this industry back in 2010, and we were talking about last click attribution then. We're somehow still at times talking about last click attribution, but thankfully a lot more buyers are looking at MTA and real solutions where they understand how every piece of the funnel contributes to that bottom line. And that's where audio has really begun to shine, is understanding that not only does audio help drive lower funnel results in addition to upper funnel results, but when you're talking about moving from a CTV message, a video message on television or online, to an audio message, to eventually maybe a display message, to better search results. Really, these things all enhance each other and help drive someone down to the bottom of the funnel. The real interesting piece that we're addressing right now is the resurgence of MMM, which has its place when you're thinking about your broad and grand marketing strategy over the course of time. But the way it had been measured historically really doesn't take a channel like digital audio into account. And we're working very hard with our DSP partners, with our agency partners, really up and down to ensure that if somebody is utilizing a vendor, the right signals are being collected from the audio channel to be able to show audio success. And one of the great chicken and egg problems with them is that you have to be a certain percentage of the marketing budget. You have a certain amount of volume per channel to even get a reading. So often we're being told it's not that we performed poorly on the nights that we didn't show up. So the solution there is, all right, let's test and learn together. Let's increase that investment. Let's really get those MMM results going, and then let's show you where we can fit within your broader strategy.
Very interesting, and we're seeing that across the ecosystem, is trying to stitch everything together to be able to build to those outcomes for sure. I want to pivot just to talk about podcasts for a bit. We're getting a lot of questions around podcasts and genres and other elements, and kind of a common example of where the inquiries come from is maybe there's a banking client who says, I want to advertise on financial podcasts. Talk to us a little bit about kind of that approach, more the contextual approach versus the targeting approach, and how advertisers might need to balance those.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate that question because I think it's important to consider the fact that contextual is a reality and is available, is let's call it a tool in the tool belt when it comes to the podcast space, but it's also limiting. And I think my favorite example is that you may be a senior level person within the financial services world, or you may be someone who's interested in financial services products, but you don't only listen to financial services podcasts. I obviously am very interested in evolutions within the ad tech industry. I listen to many ad tech podcasts as a senior ad sales person within this industry, but I also listen to sports podcasts. I also listen to comedy podcasts. I also listen to true crime podcasts. And if there are opportunities to serve me an ad because I am a target for a given brand, they're going to want to reach me wherever I'm at. And that gives them both the ability to find me, or an easier time finding me to serve that message. It also ensures that they can capture me really at any point of the day versus maybe the hour I give to Trade Desk podcast or the Ad Exchanger podcast of the day that I might be listening to.
Okay, super helpful, and kind of follows the same recommendations we would look at on the connected television side, is kind of looking at a balance, being able to A/B test and not just focus only on the content or the contextual component. Is you still need that data and targeting, because assumption versus reality, and yes, our consumption habits can vary, as well.
They can. And it's also helpful to remember that people just assume that contextual is the only option that you have. But the signals are real. The audience targeting options are real. They are far more advanced than I think most people realize at this point.
Another question we get often is around creative, whether it's, I've never run audio and I don't have creative. Give us some best practices around, not only the audio creative itself, but I know there's also visual options as well within programmatic audio. So I'd love to hear a little bit about some best practices as we think about creative and how to develop.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we talk about in market is that while I'm a huge fan of recycling, and I think it's super important, and reusing and not having to reinvent the wheel is certainly helpful in a lot of cases, is that when it comes to audio creative, the medium matters. So you obviously have audio as a format, but you might be thinking about audio on an FM station versus audio in a streaming audio campaign versus audio in a podcast campaign. And the reality is that if you're able to tailor to each of those mediums, you're able to have a more powerful impact on consumers when they're hearing that ad. Now, that sounds difficult. That sounds like it might be hard, but the reality is it's incredibly easy to format messaging to fit the right medium. And again, we're here to help. We have tons and tons of experience, years of experience in terms of being able to help consumers tailor their messaging for different audio formats, different audio mediums. And it's something that we're more than happy to do, because we don't ever want audio to be the reason somebody doesn't, or lack of audio, lack of creative to be the reason somebody doesn't run an audio campaign. But the world is also evolving, to answer your other question, in terms of how people consume audio content, particularly podcast content. The fastest growing destination for consumers and users to listen to their podcasts and watch their podcasts now is YouTube. And many podcasters are video recording their podcast sessions as well as just audio recording them now so that they can post them on mediums like YouTube. Also, Apple Podcast app is adding video capabilities just to show you where the overall consumer trend is headed in terms of consumption. But we just recently struck a deal with YouTube and are in a beta right now to offer video ad placements within our podcasts that are being consumed on YouTube. And currently, it's only available on a programmatic guaranteed basis, but it is a way for somebody to say, hey, I've got video creative and I want to be in the podcast space. And now we can give them access to that today.
It's really exciting and obviously brings together two really important mediums. So makes sense why the consumer actions are moving that direction. So that's exciting. If you were advising a marketer today who had never run audio, what's the one thing you would kind of ask them to remember from this conversation today?
I think I'm going to give you two, just while you're giving me the mic. I think the first one is have some intentionality in your audio strategy. Too many people still think of audio as a nice to have versus a must have on a media plan. When it's a nice to have, it's the last thing you add to your media plan, and it's not necessarily thought through tactically or strategically how it's going to work with the other channels that you're running. When you're thinking about that, when you're considering where the audio goes early on in the planning stage, you get that much more value out of the audio buy. I think the second piece is that right now about 21% of consumers' time is spent with audio. Only about 4 to 5% of media investments are. That's a massive gap, right? You always want to talk about having your message be where the users are. Well, the users are on audio, and many brand marketers are either not invested or underinvested within the audio channel, which is less of a challenge and more of an opportunity, particularly for those marketers who may look around and say, hey, my competitors aren't there yet. I can own that space. My brand can own that space for our channel. And we can be, not to abuse an industry term, but first to market when it comes to, owning that space. And that's something to consider if you can really be the brand, the message that is in consumers' minds without your competitors in the space. That's a big opportunity for us.
Awesome. Yes. And we're in full agreement. There's an incredible amount of white space here for advertisers who can take advantage and be strategic about incorporating audio into their plans as we move forward. So thank you so much, Ari, for this conversation and giving us some more education around audio, where it's going, and some of the exciting advancements. This has been very interesting, and excited about what the future holds.
Thank you so much for having me. We're really psyched to be partnering with you all, and really any way in which we can help continue to bring the audio message out to market, we're excited to be a part of.